Okay, it is being recorded. Thank you, Jan. Okay, so next slide, please. Talk about outcomes for today. These are some of the things that everybody, will walk away with today. And like I said, I don't tend to read per se from the slides. I refer to them. So you'll have time later, in a week or two, if you're like, oh, I wonder what she said about the EOC website. I think I want to look that up. So that's why I embedded those websites in here for you. So we're going to talk today about how to collect data on your child's strengths, interests, skills, and needs. And I really want to separate those out. You'll see as I go, because every child has strengths, every child has interests, every child has skills, and every child has needs. And maybe when we're sitting there with our child, we I don't want to say take them for granted, but we don't even know what is going on in front of us. If we're like, oh, they're on an iPad. That's just on its face. They're on an iPad. No, what websites are they familiar with? How are they maneuvering? Are they good with icons? What do they know? So many friends and scholars that are way younger than my generation or earlier generations are so technology savvy that adults don't even recognize those technology skills in some of them because the adults don't know how to describe them. So technology skills are one of the big ones. Whether a child loves to watch animal videos on Animal Planet, or loves to go to the zoo, or is really interested when they were taken to the library when they were younger and they always wanted to hear about it. That's an interest. Maybe another child doesn't have an interest in that area. So if they're doing like an internship or volunteer activity at an animal shelter and they're not interested in that, that's significant. So we really want to match them what they are interested in, because they have a passion, they have knowledge, skills. What can they do? Some children, you'll ask them. I remember my last year of teaching, I was virtual, they were virtual. I would ask them in the chat, what is your favorite breakfast food to cook or whatever. A lot of kids were like, I don't cook anything. And then some are like, I make eggs. So even skills, skills around the house that you go, oh, that doesn't really count towards future transition information. It actually does. And then needs, if a student needs a break, if they need somebody to model for them, all of that. And we want to make sure you're utilizing the resources in real time. So that means if your child's in 10th grade and there's a 10th grade counselor who is very adept at finding opportunities, connect with that person now. I've seen people online in the past, year or so, maybe in other states on a parent, forum, whatever, on Facebook. And they're like, my child is X years old. I'm trying to find this activity or that activity. I forgot to ask the counselor right before they graduated. Start planning now. Utilize those resources that are available and accessible now, because later on it's kind of hard. It's much, much harder to go back and, well, Jimmy was in your school 2 years ago. What was the name of that program you recommended, etc. And then very specific steps to take to create career exploration activities. I think this is very intimidating for young people. And so adults, we really need to support the process. We really need to scaffold. I know that's an overused word. We really need to scaffold for outcome 3 on here. Those steps. So we want to let children and teenagers, young adults have different opportunities, and we really need to help facilitate those opportunities. And then the last part is a portfolio. I know that could be digital, that could be paper, but have that sort of data collection center that tells the story of your child. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks. I wanted to remind everybody that it's okay if there's a child who, they try to do karate, they try to do piano, they wanted to volunteer and hand out name tags at the blood drive, whatever activity it is, whether it's a sport, hobby, arts experience. If they don't like that activity, but they like something else, or that's just not their thing, We have to allow for that because we allow for that for children who don't have any kind of educational disability or other challenge. We have to say it's okay that maybe that museum experience, they wanted to be on their phone instead. They wanted to go to the gift shop. They wanted to get ready to go to lunch. They wanted to get back on the bus to go back to the school. We have to allow for that and try another option. We can't say, oh, I'm taking them every Saturday for karate and I thought they would love it. And then you're going month after month after month. Maybe that child wants to be, doing something with technology, or maybe they're more into something arts related, drawing or something like that, or maybe they want to go see a play. I don't know. I'm saying we can't say, oh, well, since they're not able to do this, this, and this, that we extrapolate lack of success for other interests and areas. We need to allow them to have those options. Okay, next slide, please. I think data collection is really everywhere if we really stop. And if we look at, and we're going to get in a second, but not quite yet, we're going to look at traits, and we're going to look at willingness to participate. We're going to look at how well they work in a group. And again, all of those things will be indicators of success for them later on. So if they go and volunteer at the concession stand at the baseball game, and they work very well to group. If they volunteer and, in their Boy Scout, Girl Scout, church group, synagogue group, whatever, for, the craft fair or whatever, and work well in a group, we're starting to see trends. That because, again, there are children who unfortunately don't have that interest and don't have that capability. So we need to make sure we're looking out for those things that repeat themselves over and wow, my child's really good at being flexible, at working with a new group of people, at taking direction, maybe the adult at the concession stand for those fourth graders or whatever selling popcorn, maybe they're telling the children what to do, and some of them are like, I don't understand, or I don't want to do that, and your child is willing and able, whatever it is. Let's give them credit. Let's start really looking out and opening our eyes and going, wow, that's a great attribute. I need to put that in the portfolio that I'm seeing in multiple settings. My child has XYZ skill. And then you'll start looking at it through a different lens of, wow, I have a lot of data. It's not going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be a week. It's not going to be a month. But once you start looking out for those data opportunities, then you start seeing trends. Then you start seeing, wow, this is the profile that I can describe my child with, and they can describe themselves with. So you can tell them, wow, I noticed that when you helped out at the pool, you did a great job following directions. Then the child is then internalizing, wow, I'm really good at following directions. Then if they ever have to verbalize something, share something, type an answer whenever, what are of your strengths, then the child is able to internalize and share that. Next slide, please. So these are some of the kinds of things, and I just went over some of these. And again, you could have a list of 50 things. It depends on your child. And then also note for yourself what doesn't work, so you don't, if they didn't like karate, then some of those other martial arts may or may not work. If they didn't like piano, maybe they'd like something else. If they didn't like, volunteering with this group or that group, or staying after school to help decorate for, the pep rally, look for those signals of what they're really good at and interested in. And then also kind of keep documentation just so you know, so you're not trying opportunities that they're kind of telling you indirectly that they're not interested in, or that's not their skill set. So look for both, but these are just some of them. They work very well independently. You know, once you show them, tell them what to do, once you model it for them, they want to do it themselves. They're not going, I don't know what to do. I can't do this. This is stupid, because there are those other children that will say that. So you have to give your child credit for having that positive attitude. Working well as a team, on a team, that's a great employee trait. Working, just interacting well with people, where, you know, they're communicating well. Technology is a big one. And then some of the things that you might think that they need, and then they're successful. A check for understanding. I have a really funny story. When I was in college, I was temping. I don't know if any of you remember, you know, temping used to be a big thing. And I think I've said this in other presentations, where you sign up with an agency and then they send you someplace for like a day. So I was in college. I put myself through college financially with cobbling together, you know, grants, loans, scholarships. I worked pretty much any vacation break I could. I worked the day. So I was at the National Zoo this week, believe it or not, true story. And it was like a bad sitcom. Almost everything I did, I messed up. For example, I was answering the phones. I believe I was in one office. I'm not going to say what office I was. And I answered the phone and they said, all zoo employees have to report to whatever building for a retirement party for so-and-so. So I write it down, you know, like SpongeBob, like I'm all happy. And I write it down and I go tell my boss, I'm like, I just took a message and there's a surprise party for so-and-so. And it's in the blah, blah, blah house, the gorilla house or the amphib, whatever it was. So it was Christmas week. I'll never forget that. It was Christmas week. And I'm literally like a scared rabbit because of just how the office just felt to me. So a few hours later, they come back and I was just trying to make small talk. And I said, were they surprised? And the lady barked at me and said, we were surprised because you sent us to the blah, blah, blah building. And it was really at the other building. And that was just one thing that I messed up. I remember floppy disk. I think I deleted some files. I wrote down something else. I was messing up. Meaning I needed a check for understanding. I was having a very hard time. They weren't giving me any kind of checks for understanding. And I was making a lot of mistakes. And I was in college. So I definitely had skills to be, and I, you know, was in other offices. That setting was not the right setting for me. I was supposed to be there, I think, 3 days. It did not go well. A model of what is expected. This is a big one. I think if students see what they're supposed to do, see the end product, watch somebody else do an activity or task, that is just priceless for them to go, oh, now I know what to do because I've seen it. I know this is how this task is supposed to be performed, or this is how this activity is done. And then if somebody responds well to praise and encouragement, that's amazing. That's great. Some people are like, whatever. You know, if your child, and when I say child, I mean, you know, whatever, however old your child is, responds well to praise and encouragement, I think that's great too. And again, reinforce that when you have that conversation with your child. Next slide, please. Again, this is just continuing the prior list, really. Accepting redirection. So look at the adjective that goes with that. That tells me that the child's flexible, works well as part of a group, a team player, demonstrates a positive attitude. Again, very, consistent, motivated, willing. You can take any of these and translate it to an adjective. So if a job, for example, requires a cover letter, then you've got some adjectives to describe your child. If there's a new task and maybe it would frustrate somebody else, but your child demonstrates perseverance, that's a great skill. If they're organized, some students I've seen, they come into class and they have their markers and they have this and they have that, and they are just the epitome of ultimate and organization skills. That's a great trait. So extremely organized, and then a high level of interest in whatever. I invite all of you over the weekend to Google the little boy. He's 10 years old. His first name is Jeremiah. I can't remember his last name. He has a huge interest in sports. He's 10 years old. Some of you may have already seen him online. And apparently he had, I didn't even know the backstory until I looked it up just yesterday, that he had, I believe, a medical condition, and his family told him, you're not going to necessarily be able to be in sports long term. Passion for sports, wanted to be in sports. So I think he got to do some sports for about a year when he was younger, but he's 10 right now. And so his thing is sports broadcasting. So if you haven't looked up Jeremiah, the 10-year-old sportscaster, sports commentator, please take some time in the next week and just look him up, because he is following his passion. And now I've seen him yesterday. I think the post from a few days prior was he was interviewing Eli Manning, football player. He's interviewed some really, famous, sort of what I would call, me personally, I would be intimidated to meet somebody that famous and not having that, interviewing background that, a 10-year-old, and he's confident and he's articulate and he remembers statistics. And I saw one of the tapes the other day where he was asking somebody, do I start with this question first? Because he didn't know how to start exactly for one of them. And someone asked him what he does to prepare, and he prepares and he asks the question. So his passion, his high level of interest and knowledge in that topic, that alone is taking this young man. Plus, he's amazingly smart and very skilled. But having that, you can't fake a passion in a subject, whether it's skateboarding or photography or being a chef or working in science or working in art or wanting to work with children or work with the elderly. You can't fake that. And so if they have a high level of interest in something, let's give them credit. And then if they're a hands-on learner, that's very important too, because that means that's a certain approach that a supervisor or a teacher should take when they're working with some of our young friends and scholars. Next slide, please. So where do we start? We want to start with the end goal and work backwards. So all of us want to have, I believe most of us, we want as much independence as possible. We want, and I want you to take these sort of strategies and recommendations in terms of looking for a job. They could be applied for, those same strategies could be used for looking at recreational opportunities for once a student finishes their secondary education. It could be also for looking at housing. Look at what works for your son or daughter, and then go from there. So let's think about all the aspects of being settled in, and then work backwards. And we want exposure. I think that's a huge thing, is exposure. The more opportunities they have, the more sort of facets of, okay, I'm in this office with this person seeing this kind of work. I'm out in the field with this kind of office or this kind of worker, a park ranger doing his kind of work, all those different kinds of things. Everybody is changing. Like even who I went to college with a young lady who, she went to Yale Divinity School right after undergrad, and she was on cross country with me. So I'm a few years older than her, and I was like, Yale Divinity School. Her dad was a minister. She couldn't stand Yale Divinity School. It wasn't a fit for her. So she kind of went back to the drawing board, didn't know what she wanted to do, thought she wanted to possibly teach. Long story short, she loves glaciers. So to go from being interested in church activities to be interested in glaciers, people, we don't know where they're going. But if we start with the end in mind, sometimes we don't know right now. My point is where your child's going to end up career-wise or job-wise or interest-wise. I have other friends from college or high school that have gone and done one thing, and then I had a friend who went to nursing school in her 30s. So then totally changed. Some people want to then, I really want to be an artist. I really want to work with animals. I have a friend who was a psychology major who I thought was going to get her PhD in psychology. She works at a and her father's a physician. So I was like, oh, she's going to want to be a physician. Her brother's a physician. She is very, very passionate about animals. So she is at a very large shelter. She works at an animal shelter, working on adoptions in Central Ohio. And that's her passion. That's her area, even though she thought she wanted to study psychology. So we have to kind of look at the end goal, work backwards, but we also have to know that that end goal can change. And so we want to present different opportunities so that, yes, they're moving towards an end goal, but that end goal can change. So we want to be flexible in what those different paths could look like. Next slide, please. And this is a goal for everybody, that we want somebody comfortable, supportive, informed, and set up for success. I know myself, and I have changed jobs kind of like Goldilocks, like, oh, let me teach this grade level for a few years. Let me switch. And I think one of the most stressful things, and this is kind of a cliche, is that back to school work period right before school starts, where people are in trainings all day, they're meeting new people, they're learning new information. And there's an old cliche that says it's very difficult to learn a new skill and new content at the same time. I'm going to repeat that. And I don't know who to credit to. It's certainly not me. I'll just say an anonymous. I remember reading that in a training. It's very difficult to learn a new skill and new content. And yet, that is often what we do when an employee starts someplace. It's exhausting because you're learning the company policies, when the breaks are, where you go to sign out, all of those skills, some of that skill and some of that content. And then you're learning information. Okay, here's how we want you to do the job. Here is important content where we're going to watch this video on this skill that you must have and demonstrate. So you're being bombarded with being in a new place with new people, with new rules, and then you're supposed to digest, process, and apply new information. That's a lot for anybody, whether or not they have a disability or not. And then we're expecting perfection. We're watching our friends and scholars. Like I have a cousin, I'm the youngest of 30 grandchildren. I have a cousin with Down syndrome. And I remember one of her job settings was a government job, and she was supposed to do a specific task. And there was a day that the supervisor was out. So I think she went ahead and did the task as if the supervisor was there, because that was part of her routine that she did every day. And then I guess a different supervisor came back and said, no, you were supposed to wait for, Sarah, Susan, Sheila, whoever the supervisor was, to tell you that this is today, we're going to be doing it this day. And the expectations I felt were unfair, because it was very natural for anybody to go, oh, well, the supervisor's not here. If I did this on Wednesday and Monday and last Friday, why wouldn't I do it today? I felt that she was held to a different standard and that it wasn't fair. I really do. And her mother was very good about advocating for her. And my mom was a psychologist, another aunt was a psychologist, and they spoke up, and said, wait a minute, that would be what anybody would do. They wouldn't sit and wait for the person to come back. They would go about what they were doing. It didn't harm anything. The activity was what they were supposed to do, but they were very strict about this. I say all that because we're providing the structure, and we have this set of expectations. And often I feel like we have this set of expectations for students with disabilities that is just like, okay, we want to see perfection. We want to see perfection in this setting. Okay, if there's no perfection, then that setting's not for them. And that's actually not the case. People go in, like I said, with my zoo experience, people make mistakes. People have to be flexible about, well, how would I have known that? How would I have known when I took that message very quickly, whatever thing I wrote down, that I was making a mistake when I just took it very quickly? Maybe the person said it wrong. Maybe I heard it wrong, but people make mistakes. We want to set up everything possible for the person to be supported, informed, and set up for success, because there's so many new things that happen when they start a new job. Next slide, please. just a chart that I made, and then there's a blank one on the next slide, just to start to collect information on some of the things that have worked in different places, whether it was maybe like a volunteer experience. Like I said, I was just thinking for my daughter in middle school, some of her, for Maryland anyway, it was community service hours at a concession stand was one of the things, or she was at a retirement center doing some other work. And what worked for some of the children was seeing the schedule. Okay, this is what this person does. You're going to do this at this time. And when we get into the slide with Job Accommodations Network, you want to start to think about how the job can be performed with accommodations so that the job can still be done. Because if you can modify the job and have accommodations be in place, the person can still perform those tasks. The person with accommodations can still perform those tasks. And that's what the law says. So what does that person need for success? It doesn't change the requirements of the job. It doesn't change what the expectations are. It just puts things in place to help the then employee have a productive, successful day in order to complete their task. So it doesn't water down a task or responsibility if there's a visual schedule. That doesn't mean that the task isn't being done. I think it's very important when we ask an employer for modifications, accommodations, we're not asking for something where the person isn't going to be as productive or isn't going to do all of their work. All of their work is still going to get done. These are the supports in place that allow that to happen. Whether you start a new job and you want your favorite Green Bay Packers coffee mug on your desk, and you want your bottle of your, favorite bottled water, and you want that photo of your grandmother and the photo of your dog and the photo of your cousin, and you want those fun gel pens, whatever you want, and that helps you have a better day. Those aren't accommodations or anything. Those are things you brought along, so you're not at a desk that has, that's barren and empty of any sort of warm, familiar feeling. Just like that, just like we set ourselves up for success by personalizing our workspace, etc., we want to personalize what the person's doing every day and what supports they need. So if the person needs a reminder of the expectations, so be it. If the person needs a peer buddy for certain things, I remember my last year of in-person school, one of the things we did was we had peer buddies. And the thing about a peer buddy is not punitive. They're not doing your evaluation. So we would have peer buddies, and every so many months we would do file checks, and I would check all their files and they would check all my files. And if there was something missing, oh, you forgot to put this should really be in section 4 of the student's case file, not in section 1, or oh, did you forget to print something? So a peer buddy, I don't want to imply that a peer buddy is like helping somebody do their job. A peer buddy could be somebody to check in with, somebody to say, hey, how is this done? Where you don't have to go to the supervisor or boss and go, I don't understand this, I don't know what to do. So just like we have students who work well with peers in school, possibly they may need that initially in the workplace or not. So these are just some of the kinds of things as you see your student being successful with certain accommodations and supplementary aids and services on their IEP. Write that down, note it, and note why it is helpful. So the next slide is just a blank of this. And then the next slide we'll go to is we want to look at all of the things that help as much independence as possible. And we're going to talk about choices in a minute with job exploration. We're going to talk about knowledge. Like I said, you can't learn a new skill. It's very hard to learn a new skill and new content at the same time. And then knowing all steps of the process. To me, I think that really, really helps. If I'm going to be, when I was working in person and I was going to start a job, I wanted to know how long it was going to take for me to get there. I wanted to know what the building was going to look like. I wanted to know, was there a security guard at the front? door if I was a career changer. So before I taught, I worked in different offices. I wanted to know where I'm going to park so that I'm not late. All of those things, and then know the terminology of the workplace. I think that's really important that we start exposing students really early on to cover letters, to interview, to informational interview, all of those things. When I did advisory, which I've done in middle school and high school, and we had activities, advisory, is typically when you're meeting with students, either once a week or sometimes I've been with advisory every day. I find across the board, students with and without disabilities have a real lack of knowledge of terminology of the workplace. They just do, for whatever reason. I'm not sure what it is, or even the protocols, to send a thank you, follow up to an interview. So we really want familiarity and multiple exposures to these terminologies, to these words, so that the student is really internalizing, oh yeah, I know that's a cover letter and that's a thank you letter, and I know why. Next slide, please. This is just, these are a lot of links, and I hate the word curated, but I did check on, them, so they're okay. One of them was really good because it's a site that, and I know this is very small print, and you can just look at this on your own time. It has job interview examples, which I thought was really good. But some of the different, I'm going to pull this up on my phone really quickly because I put this in yesterday. There are a lot of different resources that I put in. And of course, YouTube is great. And YouTube has a lot of information, but YouTube also has a lot of sketchy information in terms of you don't know if you're going to click on, it's going to be a comedy channel when it's telling you something else. So what I gave in there is the first part are practice interviews, excuse me. And then you want to look up, what to wear for that job interview. You want to look up sample job applications. I found a really good link at the Prince William County Library website. If you click on Digital Library, which I gave you the link, and then you go down and you click on where it says BrainFuse. Apparently BrainFuse charges a fee, a subscription fee, but through Prince William Library, you don't pay a fee. And they actually have a link on there. And again, it's safe and it's curated. It's through the library. They have online job coaching. I'm not sure which days of the week, but it was 2 to 11. I was like, that's amazing. And they have other resources at that site. And then this was an example of an accessibility office for one local college. And I just picked Nova because it was easy to navigate. And again, we're looking at if a child's on an IEP, Section 504 plan, we're looking at the terminology of accessibility office. So that would be the office that they're going to connect with after they leave school. Okay, and next slide, please. I'm putting in different sites. I won't go into these too much depth, but the EEOC is free to contact, and they have a lot of information, because even applying for a job, somebody could be met with, hopefully this never happens to anybody, met with pushback or discrimination on just disqualifying somebody with a disability just for the fact that they have a disability. And of course, that's illegal under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the EEOC is free to contact. They never charge anything. They have teams of lawyers. This is what they do. And it depends on if it's a private employer or state and local government, because if it's state or local government, they end up not prosecuting ADA cases. They have to refer those to the Department of Justice. So the way it works, and hopefully, again, nobody would ever need this, somebody submits information to them, and now they have it all online. So you go in and you create like a profile and then put the information in. And then what happens is the EEOC contacts the person, whoever it is, and says, okay, what happened? And they decide whether they're going to issue what's called a charge of discrimination. So it could be discrimination based on a lot of different factors, but today, of course, we're focusing on people with disabilities. So if they determine that there is enough for a charge of discrimination, and again, this is also part of the hiring process, and it's also part of the, while you're working there after you got hired process, they issue a charge of discrimination against the employer, which is a summary of the issues, and then the employer has a mandate to respond in a certain amount of time. And then the case manager contacts the person and says, okay, this is how the employer responds. What is your response to them? And that employer doesn't see your response. And then they have investigators that review all the data. They look at everything you've uploaded, keep any emails, keep any statements, document anything. Like I said, this is just preventative. Hopefully it never happens, but it's always good to have this information in your back pocket. That then they issue a determination of discrimination, or they say we don't have enough information, or they believe there was no discrimination, or they issue what's called a right to sue letter, which means they didn't find enough information. They're not saying yes or no, but you're free at that point to then go pursue something if you choose to, obtain an attorney or not. So that's just information on the EEOC. I just wanted to include that. That is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It is a federal government agency, and they have regional offices all over the country, and they're kind of cobbled in terms of which office is responsible for which part of the country. So when you put in your address, they tell you which office would be responsible. Next slide, please. And I think this is the Job Accommodations Network, it's Ask Jan, another Jan, but this is a different Jan. This is the Job Accommodations Network. And they provide free support to recommend certain accommodations for specific jobs. They'll spend like an hour with you on the phone and talk about what accommodations would work for what job, so that, again, you're not, quote unquote, accommodating yourself out of the job. Like if the job requires X amount of sitting, X amount of standing, you're like, I can't sit at all, I can't stand. Maybe that's not exactly the right match. So the Jan staff will say, okay, with this accommodation, maybe you need, a break every 2 hours. Somebody needs to elevate their feet. Maybe they need a water break. Maybe they have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and they need to go take a walk and be out of a distracting environment. Whatever. They help sort of put together a very individualized plan that would I don't know if plan's the right word. They provide recommendations for a list of accommodations that match that job with that person's disability, so that the job still can be performed with accommodations. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they're still located in they're part of West Virginia University. Amazing organization, and I recommend everybody use it. Next slide, please. I want to look at time. I want to talk about a couple different things. We're going to talk about references. We're going to talk about resumes. We're going to talk about job shadowing. Don't wait to identify references. I've had students come up to me like, I'll never forget one young man who I'm not breaching confidentiality. He didn't always have the most positive attitude, and he didn't have the best behavior. And it was a tutorial class. It was a high school class in Howard County in about 2009. And he just never smiled, gave a lot of other teachers a much worse time than he gave me. And I'll never forget this. They built a brand new McDonald's next to the high school. And he came running in my room one day. I was in the middle of something. And I was like, what's going on? He goes, Miss Capone, the so-and-so teacher said today that McDonald's is coming over and they're going to do interviews here. Would you be my reference? Would you be a reference for me? They need a letter back to them, by like tomorrow at 12. It was a very short turnaround. Either the interview was that day or the next day. What am I going to say? I can't say, well, your behavior isn't great compared to some of your peers. I said, of course I'll be a reference for you. So I went into my brain and I thought of all the positives of this student. I knew he wanted to go into the military. I knew he was really kind to some some of the peers. I knew he had some good organizational skills. So of course I wasn't going to say he wasn't consistent with accepting direction, because I wanted to give him a chance and say, let's see how this goes. He ended up thriving at that job. He ended up being so excited he did get a position at that McDonald's, and that gave him so much into, just that financial independence. And again, I wouldn't have thought he would have picked me as a reference, but he did. And that, I invite you to start thinking now about different people in the community, church, synagogue, sports groups, neighborhood people who know your child, know their character, know their capabilities. And sometimes people will tell you, I'd be happy to be a reference. Could you write something up for me? So again, go back a few slides and look at some of those traits I told you, and then you can describe Jimmy or Lionel or Cheryl Lee or whomever and say, here, and you're not making anything up and you're not ghostwriting. They're asking you, well, could you give me, could you send me a Google Doc or send me a PDF with something to start with? I'd be happy to be a reference, but I'll sign it. So start thinking now. You don't have to go chase anybody in the next few weeks, but start thinking now and planning ahead. If there's a position or even a volunteer opportunity and they require a reference, just think about who you could use. Next slide, please. Practice. I think practice is so important. I had a student in residential one day. This kind of surprised me. She said, I went online and applied for a job at Safeway, Ms. Capone, and I have an interview tomorrow and I'm really nervous. This was a little girl in residential. She didn't have any parent involvement. She had been in the foster care system. I was kind of shocked that I thought it was ironic that she's literally in a locked facility where you have to get a pass to leave, and she was going to be going over on her own to a job interview at a grocery store, which I thought was amazing. I didn't want to say, well, how are they letting you leave residential? And I didn't want to tell her, well, they're not going to let you work at Safeway. Instead, I said, okay, I'm going to set a time and we're going to practice. And we're going to practice everything, because I don't think anything can sort of duplicate the benefit of actual practice, of shaking the hand and going through it. Long story short, she got the job. She ended up going like every Saturday to work at the Safeway, walking back and forth on her own, and it actually sped up her discharge date. And again, so we can't set expectations for students and say, well, I don't think that sounds like something you do, because I've never heard of them hiring you at Safeway if you're in a residential treatment center 3 blocks away. Safeway didn't care. Safeway didn't say, oh, well, why are you in a residential treatment center? What behavior did you do? They looked at this person, took the initiative to fill out that application, and she ended up having friends. She ended up having a great supervisor. She ended up having a great community experience. And I don't want to say we have to let them fail. We have to let them succeed. Why not? She was very polite to me. Yes, she had some peer issues once in a while, but sometimes, that happens. So again, if you can have people practice with your child, and it could be, 2 cousins at a family reunion, can they take 10 minutes and, go to a different picnic table and practice? Use those little bits of opportunities, use those time, ask people that maybe you wouldn't think of asking to help prepare your child on their journey. Okay, next slide, please. For a script, because some people aren't comfortable practicing with your child without a script, these are some of the things you could talk about. Have your child practice small talk, because I think, especially with being virtual in the pandemic, some of those skills didn't get honed as well for all kids, whether or not they have a disability or not. Just that, hello, tell me about yourself, things like that, things that I think anybody would freeze. I had a coworker one year, wonderful, amazing teacher, so quiet, so shy, but when she got in front of the students, was a different person. And I remember asking her one day, I said, I was just wondering how you got hired here. I said, was this your first choice and you just walked in the door? I said, because you're such an amazing teacher, I bet this was your first place you interviewed and they just hired you. And she said, no. I said, why not? I said, she said she went to like 7 other schools and nobody would hire her. And I remember going, why? So pleasant, so positive, amazing teacher, but very, very, very quiet, almost just unbelievably shy. And she said, every time I went into an interview and they said, tell me something positive about yourself, I froze and I couldn't say anything. And it really made the interviews just kind of go south from there. So our principal at the time didn't have that same question for her. So she made it through the interview. She said, I'm just unbelievable teacher, but she was denied opportunities because probably she wasn't prepared for, well, here, let me tell you something about myself that's good. Because people, we're not practicing with our students. Here are some of my strengths. We're teaching them not to brag, not to, be arrogant. So we definitely want to practice. And also I put on the bottom what not to say. We don't want to say, well, when do I start? When will you come? Some of those things we want to go over that too, sort of the don't say this, because some people will say this. I know the rain's getting a little loud outside. Hopefully not, it's not bothering you all. Next slide, please. This is just a script. You guys can read this later. I just wanted to do what the adult says and then they can either write the response or you guys can go over the response ahead of time. So again, if you have like a neighbor, a friend, somebody at a reunion, somebody, if you're like, all sitting around waiting for something to start, just use those little snippets of time and practice. And another thing I was thinking of last night as I was doing the slides is, why not take one of these or 2 of these and videotape it and then play it back for your child, and you guys can go through play by play, and even have one where your child, and again I say child but I mean any age, dress up in interview clothes for whatever job, even if they don't have a real interview scheduled, why not have them dress for success, whether it be maybe they're already dressed because they're out and about at a function, at a wedding or something, and back, oh, well, you're already dressed up, let's take 5 minutes and do a practice. Again, why not? Why not give them these opportunities? Next slide, please. Resumes. I've worked with middle school students and high school students on resumes, and a lot of them, worked with lots of students, obviously with and without disabilities. Resumes are something that's a mystery to them. And a lot of online applications don't require them. I know, I don't want to say that they're not a dinosaur or anything, but definitely start working on one now. There are some different, I didn't necessarily find one site per se that has examples, but give them credit for volunteer activities. Describe them, a motivated self-starter who, is willing to learn, that can be the description, the basic information, name, address, phone number, email address, description of the child, what kind of position they're seeking. And then, under experience, why not say, assisted with organizing publicity for the school play. Yes, they went and they helped you put up posters. They helped paint the signs, all of that. Give them credit for everything. Every single thing. It doesn't have to be paid experience to go on a resume, because people aren't expecting a 15-year-old to have 6 paid jobs. So, or somebody like that. So definitely be creative. Think of those traits, think of those experiences, and give your child credit for those. Next slide, please. And then the next one I wanted to talk about briefly was career day and creating opportunities. So if your school doesn't have a career day, or maybe even in a neighborhood group, it doesn't just have to be school. You could have career day as part of church, synagogue, temple, Boy Scout troop. And again, the weather here is getting a little iffy, so hopefully, I'm hoping the power doesn't go out. It went out a few days ago. Let's just keep going. So career day, I've helped with career day almost to the point where I'm like, I wanted to be a person that got more speakers than anybody else one year, because a friend of mine was running it. It was at a high school. We were literally trying to get like 100 speakers total. And I was like, I'm going to get 10 or 15. And They're like, oh, you'll never get 10 or 15. I remember I called the Baltimore Ravens and I got their publicity director and community interaction person. He came out and he gave out like freebies for the, kids, maybe little pennants. I called the Environmental Protection Agency. I called the Park Service. I called the fire department. Like, you can call places and people are obviously not going to be able to drop what they're doing and call you back in a minute and come rushing over to your school. But maybe if you call now, 3 months from now, yes, they're available. Or I've had it, this has happened to me more than once because I worked on career day at least 3 different schools. I remember one year it was supposed to be either the fire department or some service agency, and the day before the captain's like, oh, I have this banquet, I was just called, I have to go present, but I'm sending my lieutenant. So again, people want to help. People want to come and talk to kids. People want to share their time and their experiences. They need notice and they need specifics. Where do I go? What do you want me to say? Who is the audience? So have everything ready. And if your school or your community group or whatever doesn't have that career day, you want to start small. Maybe you want to have 4 speakers and you have the kids rotate through or something. You want to start with 50 if it's a first thing, but definitely you want to set up all your structure. You want to work as a team, get a neighbor or friend or relative to, and some of this can be remote. Why not? So really be creative of all, have a chef, have somebody from the fire department, have somebody from a pet shop, all different types of careers. And then look for these, let me see which slide this is. You want to look for free or low cost services because there are a lot of free or low cost services out there. I'm just going down here to see which link this is. Oh, this is the Career One Stop. I found this. This is a good one because if you click on there and you type in the occupation, it lists skills for that occupation. So definitely that would help you as you work on your child's resume and as you identify the kinds of people you want to come to career day. Next slide, please. This is something that I don't think a lot of adults necessarily have helped students with, because we had the last year I was in person, I was at a charter school in DC, and the seniors had to give what was called a senior expedition portfolio presentation. And if the student had a disability, they still were expected to do it with support. And they did an amazing job with this, and they were presenting like slides, and they were up in front of a panel, and they had a panel of 3 people that were not their teachers. So we had a lot of community people help. We had teachers from other part of the building. We had people's friends and neighbors. My next door neighbor, who's a pharmacist, went in a couple times and was a panelist. And I remember telling more than one student, have you thought of contacting this kind of person? Or I have a friend in this industry. Why don't you give them a call and see if you can shadow them? And I would say 90% of the time when I'm giving those students that connection, they're not following up or taking advantage of it because they don't have the structure in place for what do they do with that. So I'm trying to give you here a script. If you want to do some job exploration activities with your child, and try to plan now. I'm thinking either plan for this summer, plan for the following summer. And I gave you a script either for a phone call or you could put it in an email, and it's in the next slide. We won't get there quite yet, but I really want you to think about shadowing or doing an informational interview. Again, I want to emphasize it's an informational interview, and have the child know the difference between an informational interview where you're just getting information about the job versus an actual job interview where you're trying to obtain that position. So for an informational interview, you're trying to learn about, what does that person do? What kinds of jobs do they have at that site? I'll never forget, I read about one of my fellow alumni in the paper who I didn't graduate with. He graduated before me, and I was teaching residential, and I thought that would be really cool if I could somehow have him come and speak to my class or something, or I could, go to one of his job sites. He does luxury condos, and he was a sociology major who started by working on one house where there was a homeless guy in Logan Circle in DC. when I say homeless guy, there was somebody, a man, an unhoused man living there. And this person went in and hired him and gave him a job and said, we're going to this is an abandoned building. I'm going to hire you and we're going to redo this townhouse. So he started off with that task, that I'm going to help this guy who I bought this old townhouse. I'm going to renovate. It was just him. And now he has a like he does these high-end condos in DC. So I contacted him. I said, hey, I teach residential. I have some students in my career education class who are interested in your job, in your, now that his company was established. Not only did he allow us to come in, he closed, like he basically cleared his schedule for half the day, gave us a tour of the office, gave all the kids hard hats to keep, gave them brochures. I think they got t-shirts. So again, my whole point is I wouldn't have got that if I didn't ask. And I asked very specific questions. I wanted him to come speak, but he couldn't. Another student really wanted to be a recording engineer. So I said, I wonder if we could do a field trip to a recording studio. So I found one in Rockville. I believe it was Omega, pretty major studio. I think they have a board that was owned by by a major motion picture studio. And again, telling them the parameters, and they said, well, here's when you can't come in because we have people who pay us and they're recording. Here's when you can. Not only did I get to go and bring a group, years later, I got to bring a group, much larger group from a middle school I was at. So not in residential. So those connections are really, really valuable for job exploration. Next slide. Please. So here's a script. If you need a starting point, feel free to edit, change. These are just my suggestions that have worked for me. It sort of, I don't want to say make it hard for them to say no. I'm saying make it easy for them to say yes. If you give people a specific ask, and it's a reasonable ask, you're not asking for your child to come in and do job shadowing for a week. You're not asking to come in and, have a tour of the offices where confidential information is kept. You're asking for very specific things. And either they can help you or they can't. Either they can help you or a coworker of theirs can help you. Either they can help you maybe with modifications. Well, no, I can't have them shadow me for half a day, but maybe they can shadow me for an hour, a coworker for an hour, and another coworker for an hour. You really want those authentic sort of immersion opportunities where your child's actually at the job site or even meeting with a person remotely, where they are experiencing what it looks like to work there, what it feels like, what the physical, for lack of a better phrase, physical plant, how it's, located. Some people love going in to an office building. Some people want to work outside. Some people want to work with plants. Some people want to work with, in a hospitality situation with high energy. It really depends. So until you go in and have that opportunity to say, I really like this, or I don't like this, then you have a process of elimination. So the more exposure your child has, the more you can say, yes, this works, or no, this didn't. Next slide, please. These are just different things to practice in advance, and you can look at those later. But think about all the different things that go into, if you've started a new job, what your decision making is. Oh, I don't know what to wear the first day. Will I be, what will I be on my feet? What will I be doing? I'll never forget my last in-person job. Unfortunately, I was up all night and my late dog was at the emergency vet. I had 1 hour of sleep. It was my first day. And at 7:15 in the morning, after about a 90-minute commute, we were supposed to do a hopscotch activity imitating the pattern of the prior person. And of course, everybody made it through like the little maze or the little puzzle that was done either in tape or chalk on the floor. And there I am, my very first day, And it wasn't going to be my supervisor. It was a supervisor from another division or another part of the building. I wasn't going to go in and go, I've been up all night at the emergency vet. I only had an hour of sleep. Maybe I can't do the activity. So again, it's like, I think I wore the wrong shoes. I was dehydrated. I couldn't explain all that to them. I'm sure I didn't make an amazing first impression. I did the activity and I had to do it over and over. No, you missed that step. Okay, it's steps. And I remember going, wow, if they only knew. But again, I didn't know when I planned what to wear the first day of work that I was going to be jumping hopscotch on this big, panel in the middle of this foyer as part, literally not even like get water, get coffee, have breakfast. It was walk up, good morning, everybody, over to the groups. So again, you want to be flexible, you want to be ready, you want to be comfortable. Obvious, needless to say, I was not comfortable that day. That was not a good start for me. It was an exhausting week. I ended up staying at that job, but even anticipating, did you bring a bottle of water? Do you know where to park? All of those little things. And then who's your supervisor? When do you check in with them at the end of the day? Is there a sign out sheet? All of those things for people who don't have a disability and there's confusion on them, on those expectations, there could be added confusion if somebody has a disability and doesn't know to ask. So you want to be sort of extra thorough and cover every possible sort of situation that could come up. Next slide, please. A portfolio, I know this may seem like a little bit of a dinosaur, that's the way I'm pronouncing it, tool to some people. I still think it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea for your child to see that they have a collection of information and tools that are used for a job or used for, okay, I want to go audit this class at this college and I want to take this. What do I have? What's my evidence that, yes, I'm a good candidate for this, or I want to do this unpaid internship or this paid internship or this volunteer opportunity. What do I have that I know? So when these opportunities pop up, that there is a resume and a cover letter and the reference letters and the letters from staff and classwork samples. Take pictures. If your child is out in the community doing something, or they're at career day, or they're volunteering, or they did a great job at school, or they're in the school musical, whatever it is, they're, helped painting the set, whatever it is, whatever they did. Take a picture, print it out. That's part of a portfolio. Those are pieces of evidence. If it's a digital portfolio, then you have that. You can put that in a PDF. That reinforces confidence with somebody like, I can do this. I know what to do. I have examples. I was able to do this, this, and this. I have this that I worked on. This is the group of people that I worked on. Oh, I remember that was my boss, during the when I worked at the, when I did the volunteer work at the concession stand or whatever it is. Then there's that all together, that collection, and then everything is ready to go for your child. And again, any of this can be duplicated, not just for jobs, whether it's looking for independent housing, whether it's looking for independent recreation opportunities. You have a collection of information that tells the story of your child. Because what I don't want people to do, and this is cliche, I know this is cliche, don't let other people write your child's story. Don't let other people say, here's what your child can or can't do. I have a relative who was on an IEP in elementary school, and one of the teachers said, there's really not a lot we can do with so-and-so. And they had a one-on-one, and they had a severe writing issue and a processing issue. And they're like, they just need to they can't really participate in the lesson. They just need to go sit. And this was like second or third grade. It was a public school. The parent ended up moving the child to a private school, getting some additional support, getting an outside, some outside assessment, some outside support, outside different things. There was a medical issue, different things going on. The medical issue got mitigated. Student was by middle school, the student was definitely excluded. I observed that and it bothered me, and was just kind of like that scrawny, didn't quite, wasn't athletic, didn't, not too assertive. Something happened over like the next couple years where the student grew bigger and started doing yoga, started going to the gym, and really had the medical issue mitigated, ended up playing football in high school, ended up doing much better. Long story short, the person's getting a PhD in cell biology right now. So that was a teacher who said in second and third grade, there's not really a lot we can do to help because, he can't write. He's not really telling us the answer. So my whole point in saying this is don't let somebody else say, well, no, I don't think that's a good opportunity. I think that would be too stressful. I think there's too much preparation needed. Unless we try and give supports and let students have those opportunities to see if they like it, to see how they do, we really don't know. And a lot of teachers go into teaching straight out of college. Nothing wrong with that. I was a career changer. So with all due respect to them, their experience with the workforce is limited to they went to college, they got a degree, and then they became a teacher. Not all of them, but I'm saying many of them. So for them to say, well, I don't think, Jimmy or Sally or Aiden would be good at XYZ job, I think that's a little speculative. And I think it's like, we don't know until we let these children try. And I think that's very cliche, but we still have to remind ourselves of that. Next slide, please. And I think all of this is what I said before for a smoother adjustment. That's for anybody. Know in advance as much advance information that you can sort of help your child absorb, to have that sense of familiarity where, okay, this is where you're going, this is how far, this is what it's going to do. And this could be if it's going to any new activity. This isn't just for jobs. This could be if they're trying out, a new place to go for a certain activity. Have all those things that are unfamiliar that you can sort of practice ahead of time so that they are familiar with at least where they're going, because all of those other areas of uncertainty for who they're interacting with, what the expectations are, all of the other stressors are then the only thing that's new to them that day. They already know where they're going. They can already visualize. You can take a picture of it. You can say, okay, here's a picture of the parking spot where we're going to park. Here's a picture of the person. Try to get as many things that are unfamiliar. Try to remove those and put those into the familiar bin so that when your child starts, and again, whatever this is, if this is housing or this is a new recreation opportunity, whatever, so that there's a smoother adjustment. Oh, they've already been here before. They know that that's where, one of my things, whenever I get to a new school, where's the water? Where's the restroom? A lot of classrooms, certain years didn't have phones. Where's the phone? Where's the break room? Where not to park. All of those things, because those are stressors that they sound little, but they can interfere with the rest. Excuse me, I have somebody at my door. Hi, I apologize. Somebody was at the wrong house and they were banging. And I apologize for that. What you can do for a smoother adjustment, we went over that. Next slide. I apologize again. Something was supposed to be delivered later to another neighbor. This is one I really, really want to emphasize. And as we're coming to a close, if you have in-person resources, you want to use them now. And I alluded to this at the beginning. they are available to you now. They're not necessarily available today in an hour, but ask them now. Say, hey, I want to plan for next summer for some opportunities for my child. Could we touch base 15 minutes every other month so I can ask you about your experience with XYZ? When you establish those relationships now and you have that in-person familiarity, later on when you need that, oh, I need a copy of a transcript, I need a copy of a reference, I need a copy of work samples. That is so much easier to get, but really you want to use the person now because that's part of their job and that's part of their responsibility to help students who they're currently assisting. I've seen that in many schools where parents are coming in, they're going, my child went here last year and I can't get XYZ. And I know this file was sent, whatever. I need a copy of accommodation so I can go to the school accessibility office. Whatever it is, have those connections now. Know what each person, how they can help you. Know which person helps you with which task. And then people change. We have long-term subs. We have case managers change. Get those copies, get those PDFs and find out, oh, next year, are you still going to be the person I ask if my child's in the next grade? If there's a really, really helpful person, take advantage of that situation. If there's somebody that maybe isn't as responsive, I remember one year I had a team leader. I'd say 50% of the time, she ignored a lot of our emails. She was too busy, couldn't do it. If it wasn't a crisis, she would ignore it. I would ask somebody else. So find who you do get answers from and then use that to a degree. And obviously say, oh, yeah, I really appreciate your time. Are you the right person for this? Or I want to plan career day. I want to give my child more opportunities. Who at your school does this? So ask them not only what they can help you with, but who they recommend you reach out to. I hope that makes sense. And again, I apologize for the interruption. This is real life, people, right? Next slide, please. Oh, then that would be questions, and I'll look in the chat. Hopefully some of those links will be helpful. Hopefully, some of the information is giving you at least a different perspective or an additional perspective. I'm sure many of you are already very, very skilled at getting a lot of this information. I think it's very important that it's in one central place. So when those opportunities pop up, everything's together. And again, if you're a digital person, have it digital. You can then also